think we've got a couple to talk about with that too. So it'd be a nice segue out of talking about this mix and match option of ways of seeing movies, and talk about some of the ones that we actually have seen. So I don't know, Ronald, why don't you kind of start us off? You kind of brought up the idea of jumping into just an open conversation about what it looks like out there right now. So what do you want to say to start it off?
Yeah, so I guess this stems from a conversation in the middle, in the height of lockdown, because you know how people talk about the pandemic in the past tense. The pandemic's still going on. Lockdown is not going on right now. There's a possibility that it feels like something may come up later on. But I remember at the height of lockdown talking about the idea. We kind of scoffed, you know, it was like kind of 50-50 on it. But all of us kind of felt like there could be a chance that these theatrical movies could go straight to these services. And what was going to be the move for Black Widow and a couple others that were, it didn't seem like there was a plan beyond just the initial promotion. And then the company's kind of flopping on whatever the secondary part of kind of preparing people for the idea that this may come out later. Things were released in press releases and things of that nature. So I guess, you know, things have opened up a little more. Movies have come out, some exclusively to theater, some simultaneously on streaming service and theater. So now that we're a little removed from the lockdown time where it felt like there was no other way to see it but a streaming service or preparing for it being delayed, what do you think about the state of movies, the box office, just movies in general? How do you feel about its delivery, and are theaters back? I guess that's the first question I have. Are theaters back? Because you know that's a part of the marketing of a lot of movies. Are theaters back? You know, we're back. F9's out. We're back. Go see this. We're back. How do you feel?
Only in theaters.
Only in theater. You can never hear Dolby surround sound like this in your home, stupid. Kind of that.
Yeah, Cinemark is still doing the thing with they show you in the middle of the screen a small rectangle and say, should you be watching Free Guy like this or like this? Then they show a little trailer. So it still feels a little thirsty. But I don't know. I think there is a theatrical experience to be had. And I know that absolutely. I've gone to see a couple movies, and I know when I've gone, I've looked at other showings that, like when I bought a ticket for the next day, if I look for that evening's showings, I saw where most of the tickets were sold. So I don't know if it's back, but I definitely think there is a model that exists, and that maybe at the moment, I mean, maybe speaking for myself, I took a while before I was comfortable going back into the theater. But once I did, I sort of felt comfortable for a hot second, and now I'm starting to feel uncomfortable again. You know, I think that, I don't know. I mean, I really think those kind of rising numbers you're talking about, Ronald, with the fact that, I mean, I don't know if it might be hyperbolic to say we're heading into another lockdown. I don't think it will get as extreme as it did, but maybe this time people will clue in and it will only take a few months rather than a year. I mean, I don't really think that we haven't progressed, but I do think that feeling that a lot of people seem to have, that we were just back to normal, I don't think that's the case. And I don't know, theaters being back, I mean, that's an interesting notion, because I think we're all noticing, and Steve, this would be a great time to get your opinion, because I know you kind of track a lot of like the grosses and stuff like that, but like, you know, there's just right now movies coming out at best are going to have a limited expectation compared to what they might have had in the past. So even though we're probably about to talk about some news that has to do with the streaming, you know, what a movie makes on streaming versus what it makes in the theater, and what, you know, that's becoming a matter of lawsuits for some people. But it's also just a question of, what does that mean to the model where, okay, a Marvel movie came out and it was kind of guaranteed to pull in 500 million worldwide or something, and now they've got 3 more movies queued up this year, and it's not a world where that is happening. So I mean, this idea of kind of burning off content seems kind of strange. And I guess Marvel, that's at the tip of the spear for a lot of this, but those were a lot of the big money makers. You mentioned like F9, Ronald. I mean, I think that's another big one. These movies just have different hopes than they would have had before. So is Hollywood kind of just continuing? Are they kind of going, let's just act like everything's normal and keep it rolling? But the limited grosses, the lesser returns seems like it would have to start to affect the way that movies are made and the way things are greenlit and the way that the whole thing works. I just don't think that we've seen that fallout yet, oddly enough. Even though we spent a year waiting for shit to come out, I don't think we've seen like what happens when they just can't make back what they used to make on all this stuff. So
yeah, I think like, well, I mean, I definitely like don't think theaters are back in general. I think that they're still navigating you know, how to get people back to the theater in some ways, because it does seem like when you look at these box office returns over the last few weeks, even with the exception of Black Widow, like John was saying, that kind of was almost guaranteed to have a bigger than average opening comparatively to the other movies that have come out. Because I mean, really, you know, that Fast 9 and Quiet Place 2 are really the exceptions to this current phase of theater going that we're seeing. And is an interesting mix among those three, with like, you know, two of them being theatrical only and one of them being a day and date on streaming, and yet that one was the biggest opening of the three. So it's like really hard to pin down the unique trait beyond it being a Marvel property, which is truly what it is, probably. I just think that it shows otherwise outside of those, that there's a ceiling right now in terms of what these movies are able to accomplish in the theatrical run. Now, they may have longer legs. They may stay in theaters longer because less is coming out, it feels like, even though in the coming weeks, there are some new movies coming out in a quantity every Friday. Like this week, when, you know, this podcast comes out, like we weren't able to see Free Guy in theaters, or I don't think any of us went. I don't think any of us went, but you know, the screening for it, like I just wasn't ready to go, you know, to a theater again. I mean, I have gone since, you know, I saw A Quiet Place 2. And I actually almost thought about going to see Old this week, but the theater by me, like when I actually went up to go see it, I'd been watching it all day, and it was at this point only in its third week of release, and is in one of the smallest theaters in the building at my local cinema. And by the time I got there was too many people in the theater for my comfort level. And I mean, you know, an hour or 2 hours before that, it was a lot more open, and I felt comfortable going. And you know, I turned around and left. So that's a case for a movie staying in theaters maybe longer, that doesn't have this day and date model, that could have some legs. Like I think Old is probably a good example of it having that, because that's actually one that for some reason, like, you know, probably the M. Night of it all, has like a true theatrical window, it seems. You know, like it will have a traditional window. It's not going to hit VOD anytime super soon, from what I've been able to research. But for the most part, every other movie in theaters right now is in some sort of flux in terms of when you can get it at home, whether it's the same day, you know, 17 days later, like on Universal's model, 45 days later on Paramount's model. You know, it's such a weird mix and match, mashup, mishmash of what you have as a movie watcher option wise, you know, like how bad do you want to see Old? And I want to see it pretty badly, because I really am very interested in seeing every movie he releases, just out of curiosity of what way it could go. But I'm not at the point, if it stays in, you know, it'll be in theaters for a while. And if I have an opportunity next week to maybe go and it's not as crowded, I probably will, you know, as long as like the COVID of it all hasn't blown up here in Maryland. We're still benefiting from a pretty good place here in terms of where this state is. But, you know, if I were living in Florida or Louisiana, I would not be going to a movie theater, you know, period. So I think that's the other thing, is that like demographics and, you know, geographics and all these things are playing into who's going to see movies when. All to just say, like, the takeaway that I have is that even for theatrical exclusives, still there feels like there's a ceiling, and it's just the number of people, the greatest amount of people that are willing to go see a movie opening weekend. It's much smaller right now, and that's obvious. But I think that number trickles through if a movie can stay in theaters longer, kind of like Tenet experienced, you know, which, you know, kind of was a bust a bit when it first came out. But when you look at the numbers, you know, and a movie's made, I think it's on over 500 million worldwide, you know, in the full run. So like, it's not a complete wash anymore, and it's actually pretty successful, all things considered. But it's just like a weird, it's a weird thing where you try to, there's a lot of publicity and marketing and like spinning happening to make everything that comes out look like it somehow succeeded at something. But I think that's really just trying to see a way to promote the fact that they need movie theaters to stay open, you know, and they need to find a way to encourage people to go see movies. Now, what kinds of movies they are, that's what's going to change, I think, forever because of this. But I don't know. It's weird. I mean, like we are moviegoers, and I know, you know, I don't think you've gone back yet, Ronald, and to the comfort level that you're ready to go, and that's totally understandable. Like, and me having gone, I think I've gone twice. You know, I've got like these metrics, you know, where I'm just like, I want to go to the movies all the time, and I would love to go there on a weeknight, the last show, when I feel like there won't be a lot of people there. And even still, it's like, if I look at it and it's too crowded, I'm not going. But it's too crowded on a weeknight at a last show, so that's something to say.
Yeah.
For a movie in its third week of release, which is, you know, again, my example here is Old, which seems to be dropping a lot from week 1 to 2, but going forward, I'm very curious what it drops week over week.
Well, you know, Old, I had it pulled up. I just thought it was kind of interesting. It looks like it has a budget of like 18 million, right, and then box office already of 50.9. I guess that's worldwide.
It is, yeah.
But still, done and done. You right, know, I was about to say Quentin Tarantino. M. Night Shyamalan gets to make another movie or 3 right, or whatever. So there. I mean, in my mind, like, the idea of these huge behemoths, you know, the idea that they're spending 300 million on a movie that's going to make them $1.5 billion, or more than that for something like Endgame. Right. Who knows how much they spend on something like that? But like, I like that idea of seeing movies that have that kind of scope and scale. But I also think that that is so bloated and huge that is not a model that, say, works for just movies in general. And I don't right, like the idea that we're going to lose those sort of mid to medium small budget movies. Like 18 million is a pretty big budget for like an indie, but for someone like M. Night Shyamalan, he's still working in that kind of reduced zone of like working fast and loose and kind of like making a concept work and not somehow inflating the budget with all the stuff that happens with the usual kind of blockbuster to be. So I don't know. I mean, whether I'm encouraged by that number or not, but I kind of feel like I am, just because, you know, that is a kind of level of movie that I like to see surviving, even if it is surviving on the name maybe of a director who has, you know, has had huge successes. He's not like an obscure figure, but he is, you know, he's one of those guys whose name has been a liability at times. And so you never know how much people's expectations of what an M. Night Shyamalan movie is, like how much that hurts or helps people going to see the next one. So I don't know. You see little success stories like that. Yeah. And the Tenet thing, even though we all thought it seemed kind of hubristic that Christopher Nolan insisted on this release and coming out the way he did, it did happen like an old-fashioned blockbuster where it just stays in the theaters for a long time, and there's enough curiosity about it to keep it going. So, you know, I don't know. Part of me thinks it's good if we start to see a slightly different trajectory towards success from some of these new movies. I just wonder how much that's going to change the kind of content that they're making. It might change the content for the better too. Who knows?
Right.
If they're going for sort of modest returns or something, I don't know. I mean, I know that maybe I'm being, you know, I'm being optimistic or even skeptical, or pessimistic, depending on how you look at it, as far as like that it's going to change things that much. But I do think that, like, we've talked about that phrase, the new normal, a lot. I think that kind of to the spirit of that question about, is it back, Ronald? You know, what at this point would it even mean to be back? Do you know what I mean? Like, you just have to have something about that communal experience has been tainted. And you know, so maybe that's what we're saying is, when will that not feel like a calculated risk? And I don't know when that will be. I bet you'll still be wearing masks into the theater, and some people will be wearing them even if it's not mandated, you know?
Yeah. It's you're right. There's something about the way that everything happened. I mean, you know, beyond the politics of it, I think that the fact that science is kind of a thing that, you know, you learn new information, you adjust, is a very hard concept for people to understand, even though, you know, this practice has been pretty effective throughout human history, right? Like, just being like, oh, okay, so, you are allergic to this specific kind of dander, so we're not going to put that kind of learning things about how your body reacts to things is not a new concept. But I think the pursuit of information, of accurate information, is what's kind of impaired this whole experience. The fact that people kind of get their information from whatever they use has become their guiding light. So somebody may use the news, somebody may use Instagram, somebody may use Facebook, somebody may use a barbershop. You know what I mean? It really is kind of
church
or church. And the fact that those have conflicting information, even if you didn't hear the person that your local politician say that two different ways, the fact that you heard it one way in a barbershop and you see it on TV a different way and you hear it on this, that creates a large conflict. So the culture of surrounding information and its accuracy is directly affecting the movies. But what it is doing for real is that people are scared shitless. Like I know people that are like conspiracy theorists to the wall. Like this is all fake, this is not real, that still aren't going to the movies like they used to. So there's something about some of this that is really penetrating through people's just kind of lack of trust in the idea that COVID is a real thing. People do not believe that, but that doesn't line up with the idea of like these theater numbers. People are afraid, and I don't know if anybody wants to admit that. I think it's a very hard thing to admit that, like, fuck, I'm scared to go out in this public place, because a theater is very different than going to like a cookout or like going to. There's a little bit of air, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The fact that you're in a theater with all this recycled air, kind of, it's daunting.
Well, I mean, when you go though, people are acting pretty normal because again, the mandate will be there. Right. But when I went to the last movie I went to, what was the last movie I went to? The last
Green
one I
Knight?
went to was old, actually. The last movie I went to, people were I was noticing some people weren't wearing their mask into the auditorium, but there were only like 4 or 5 other people in the whole room. So once I was in there, I was kind of like, this is what it is. But, some people, you look around, but everyone seems to be, like they have a mask and maybe they have it pulled down and then they're eating. And maybe if they notice you looking at them and you see them like pull their mask up or whatever, but everyone seemed to be kind of abiding by it as much as possible. But yeah, seeing a few people coming and going at that last visit where they weren't wearing masks was one of those things. Right as I was hearing these numbers too, I was like, okay, no, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to slip just because every now and then it comes up, because it is convenient, like you said, Steve, when it's a time that seems like there shouldn't be that many people there, and then you look and there's not. It's like, okay, I can go to, I know this routine at this point. But yeah, I mean, I think that fear is the thing that's kind of undefinable, and I think that it's not impractical to be afraid of this. No. Like it's like you don't want to talk people into feeling more comfortable with a situation that might be uncomfortable. But some of these movies are, and in fact, what took me to the theater to see The Green Knight and to see Old was what you were talking about, Steve, was just that sense of like, okay, some of these movies I want to see them, and they are trying to have a theatrical experience. Like they are trying to have you excited to see that movie in the theater and not not see it some other way first, and to not give it to you, not have the VOD release scheduled for 2 weeks out or whatever they've done with some of these things, or have like the first weekend it's available for this, whatever thing they do sometimes to kind of split it up.
Sure.
That seems like yet another thing they've decided is, okay, this movie can withstand that, maybe it'll be around for 6 weeks, which honestly would have been a long time for a movie, even before any of this craziness happened. You know what I mean? Like
definitely
that, even hit movies are gone within 4 weeks a lot of times in recent years. So the idea that something could live on for a month or more is again, it makes me feel kind of good, even though I know it's a bad sign for the industry.
Right.
But it reminds me of the way it used to be when a movie was a hit, that it just hung around.
Right.
Right. And like the reason I mentioned Tenet really, and I think the number I said was wrong, it's more like 360 or 370 worldwide. But the perspective of that is just simply that like when it came out, things were way still restricted. still like at 20-30% capacity, like only a quarter of theaters were open domestic. There's a lot of factors going against it, and they kind of stuck it out through the fall and winter, and got to that number, where a movie like Black Widow has been out for only like, I don't know, 3 weeks or something. And, it did the day and date, and like globally it's at like 370. It's at a comparable number, but it's in an environment where theaters are open, and there are no mask mandates in the theater. So like it is something where, it's able to reach that number faster, but it's dropping
quicker,
way faster. Like it's going to hit that wall where, it may still be in the top 3, on box office things here, week to week or day to day. But, the fact that, there's a movie coming out, Suicide Squad and Free Guy comes out this week, and there's a movie that comes out next week, it's like, it's going to just keep pushing it down. And, I don't know how much more past, the 400 mark, 450 maybe it gets to. And that's a Marvel movie that waited until July, to come out. And, it's kind of peaking there so quickly. But
did we just segue, because we want to talk about this brouhaha, right? The Black Widow.
I think so.
The grossest.
That's what they call a segue.
Yeah, right. I mean, so Black Widow has been, the fact that it came out in this hybrid model of Disney Plus, it's day and date with theaters, and it was a premium price, and $30, I think, right? Wasn't it $30?
Yeah.
So it wasn't like free with the service. So I felt like it had that kind of prestige quality to that release. And I know at home we kind of made a big deal about hitting play on the darn thing, after spending $30 on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we found out that, and this is something that may have been brewing before. I don't know when this came, if it happened because certain grosses that were reported were different than what was expected or whatever. But Scarlett Johansson, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it started with her suing Disney for basically the money she lost by virtue of the movie having this hybrid release, that she was supposed to have a cut of the gross, and that her cut of the gross was, wildly less than it might have been had the movie been out exclusively theatrically. I don't know if you just wait until the movie's out to pull the trigger on that lawsuit, or if they were, you know what I mean? I don't know if I quite understand why it happened when it did, why there wasn't more pushback before the movie came out. Some part of me kind of feels like we're going to see more and more people that are done with Marvel then turning around and saying a little bit about what was happening behind the scenes and how they felt, about.
Right.
But this is like one of the first little bits of, I mean, I'm not blaming Scarlett Johansson at all, because people should get their money if they're owed it. But there's been this back and forth now. There's like, been a lot of press about this, but like, this is like one of the first little bits of bad blood that's been, one of the cracks in the facade of that kind of Marvel family kind of thing. Is here's one of the first people, one of the big names to leave. She's on the way out of the franchise, and now this kind of stuff is coming out. I don't know what how does it make you feel about the, in relation to the box office thing? Steve, we were just talking about the hybrid model, but beyond that, just the, this kind of it feels like a family feud is happening in public.
I don't know, what do you think?
Contracts are contracts. So if you agreed that the movie was going to be released a very specific way, and Disney went against that and released it another way, you can sue them for that.
Right.
And then another thing that's super interesting, something that adds a little bit of weirdness to me about Disney, is that press release where they said like how much she made.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. If I'm owed $100 million, pay me 100. Don't tell everybody you paid me $20 million.
Yeah.
We paid you quite a bit for your efforts. And that felt like
that was that Disney thing was weird. Can we agree the tone of that felt like really like the other thing felt like showbiz, but I mean, it felt her lawsuit felt like showbiz. You got to work this out. This kind of thing happens all the time. But that release was like, there was something really, I don't know. I keep wanting to say like catty or something. It just felt like it was much more like bitter and personal than it needed to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Specifically with everything that's happening with like women athletes in the Olympics and stuff like that. This feels very tone deaf, especially as all this stuff is kind of happening,
Right.
It's gross a little bit. I mean, like, men make so much money in the industry, and to be told like we already paid you $20 million. She was compensated. You know, it's just like tonally just off.
Yeah.
And one thing people have to understand about lawsuits is like the intention behind this is to show that she wants to be compensated, right? But typically with Disney, this is going to be settled out of court. This isn't anything that'll probably go to trial. If it does, this is going to fuck up. This is going to be a bad stain on Disney's name. I don't think it's going to go to trial though. I think you're going to settle way before.
I mean, you got to be right. The contract is, if it says what it says, right? Like if the contract was written before they had this idea of doing things this way, it doesn't matter how much she made or will make. That was something that's the breach of contract right there. I mean, I'm sure it's about profits, but ultimately, you know, there's a lot of this happening. I'm sure that the next wave of people that sign up are going to have some pretty ironclad stuff in there about different platforms and leaving it open to Disney to kind of make their money how they want to make it. But do you think this is going to scare big star? I mean, Marvel's been able to sign anybody they want forever. Is this going to scare people away if they feel like they're not going to make that they're only going to make 20 instead of 30 or 50 million or whatever?
I think it just has to, like you said, the paperwork just has to be a little more precise. It's almost like think about all the sitcoms that we watched in the 90s, man. There is a ongoing dispute about when those shows go to streaming, how people are being compensated for them. Like whether people know it or not, when something changes forms, there has to be some sort of compensation because it's not the same. Things going into syndication are one thing, but it going to a different thing where people can watch something 50 times in a row. Watch it. My wife watches Community every night. She turns it on and just plays it. Yeah. I know
she knows how to live.
Yes, I know 5-6 people that do things like that for other shows. So like if I know 5 or 6 people, there has to be, you know, there are other people that are just playing things and going to sleep or playing things and watch them as they work, you know. So the compensation has to be there. I don't know why people don't understand why this is not a thing. This is very much a thing in streaming media. It's changing the way that people think about business.
There's no doubt that she has a pretty ironclad case here. I think, you know, her contract is one thing. You know, they have emails. You know, if you read into this whole thing, they have emails from Disney, her agent and lawyer, like basically trying to assure them of what the theatrical window would be, and them kind of confirming that it would be like a standard Marvel theatrical window. And you know, there's some ambiguity to some of the language, you know, but I think that's probably why this kind of thing gets settled pretty quickly. And I mean, honestly, I think, I mean, in this case, I think her point is valid and they need to pay her. I mean, you know, it's the kind of thing where like, you know, The Rock then comes out and kind of champions Disney this week for releasing Jungle Cruise and date, you know? So you have, there's just two different like things. And that may be how the contracts were built out, you know, in terms of what he was standing to gain from a theatrical versus a hybrid model. We don't know those things and we don't need to, but I mean, I think what we're all saying in some way and what we've seen happening even like with Warner and HBO Max and the mess they got in is that, you know, there's no precedent for it. And what you're watching and what we're talking about is the precedent being created. So like, you know, what happens with Scarlett, and, you know, there's talks of like Emma Stone doing something similar for Cruella and like, you know, all these people, Emily Blunt doing something for Quiet Place 2, and that's towards Paramount, possibly doing something for Jungle Cruise. Like, it just is kind of like a moment where like, you know, the talent of at that level, I feel like especially that do have things worked in for back end points and, you know, box office profits and things like that, you know, we're going to see a lot of it. And, you know, these movies that they're trying to navigate, you know, trying to get it out there in any way they can and make as much money as they can with the state of the theaters that we just discussed. Because the reality is, I mean, this is just my opinion, that even if it was only theatrical, there's still a ceiling, you know, like it made a lot of money on Disney Plus, but you look at a Fast and the Furious 9, which was only theatrical, and it made less than Black Widow. Now, I think Black Widow would have made more money, sure, if it was theater only. But I don't know week over week if people continuing to buy the premiere access. I mean, I'm sure they're still making lots of money there too. I don't know what they're going to offer her in terms of a settlement. it's just a weird thing, man, which is what we've been talking about so far this whole episode, that like you can't navigate it because they don't know how. Like you don't have a precedent, and they're going to create that, and that's what contracts will look like now going forward. Movies going into production, everything that we're seeing announced and that we're talking about now, that stuff's going to be renegotiated and changed to protect these people, and the studios themselves, more importantly, are going to try to prevent this from happening in the future.
Yes.
But I mean, all said and done, she's got a solid case, and she, like John said, is one of the OG Marvel stars of the MCU, and they need to do right by her. And it's very well known that Feige is pissed about this.
He's pissed,
and that's not good for Disney at all.
Yeah,
and
you don't want any sudden moves.
Yeah, you don't want to lose the man with the hat.
Yeah,
that's what I'll say. Ronald knows the power of the hat, and you don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about Feige now that you know that if he's pissed, he's going to bat for one of his stars? You warming up towards him at all?
Come on, yeah, man. Like I mean, because I've heard from some pretty reliable sources, some like industry insiders that I listen to, that man,
Steve.
he's been you and Steve, that Kevin's been kind of fighting this from the beginning. Not the idea of like the theatrical thing, but if a person, especially Scarlett Johansson, like you said, an OG Avenger, has expressed some anger about the way the business is, like, don't you want to keep that person happy?
And she's leaving she's still got stuff going on with Disney, but she's kind of you want someone to lead it. Just we talked about it when we talked about Black Widow, how it felt like it was kind of bungled all around for this character and for this actress, and it just kind of feels like this is like the icing on the cake of that. Of like, just you got to treat these stars like stars. You can't treat them like they're action figures or like they're chess pieces or whatever, as tempting as it is when the franchise is the star. In fact, there was a tweet, I saw some people, I don't remember what the original article was, but someone had posted an editorial talking about how the Marvel movies are so franchise driven that it's that almost who stars in them is irrelevant. And they said anyone could have been in that Iron Man suit and it would have been a hit. And so many people piled on saying bullshit.
I saw that.
It's incalculable what casting Robert Downey Jr. did for that movie and for this franchise. And Scarlett Johansson, as problematic at times as people have seen the Black Widow character as she kind of developed, having her be that character kind of saved it in a lot of cases. And definitely in the last few movies, I feel like they really, I guess from Winter Soldier on, I kind of think they were handling that character pretty well. But these are big names. A lot of people are drawn to these movies because of these names, even though we have flirted with saying that the franchise is the star with Marvel. They still need, the legitimacy of those people coming in. Samuel L. Jackson. Mark Ruffalo, even, people liked them for other real movies that were very good. It was a legitimizing factor. And I'm glad. I did not know that detail, that Kevin Feige was pissed, but I'm glad to know that that's the side he would be on, because I do think he's more closely related to the production and the actors in the movie side of it than he is necessarily the Disney machine side of it. But he's also part of that too. So
I think it is a mix of like, it is definitely his stance has definitely been the fight for theatrical, for sure. But then I think when the realization of what's going to happen, that's where it pivots a bit to, the rumblings of this. There's a newsletter I subscribe to that I get from like a, guy used to be an editor at Hollywood Reporter. And, when this one came out, it was just basically talking about how, like, before this story broke, there was a lot of Kevin Feige involvement, I guess, maybe possibly trying to, in those, her team trying to confirm what the deal was with the release, and like trying to understand how it would affect her take from the contract that they had. And I think his involvement pivoted to that, what I mean? That's, I think, what they're really talking about when they are commenting on his displeasure with what's happening with her, or what happened with her, and her attempt to write this possibly before it came to this. And basically, from what I've heard and read, like, basically Disney just dodged it, and then this happens. So pay up. And and you're right, Ronald. The comment that their press release was really shitty, I think. And I'm a Disney guy, and like I'll go to Disney every year. Like it's not. I just think you call it as it is. Like that was a shitty press release. Calling into question her character and things like that regarding a pandemic, and like, Yeah, Disney, you're open at 100% right now
I
in
know,
Florida.
so
One of the
crazy.
worst. Like, let's not talk COVID right now. Let's just talk about how much money you owe this actress and just make it right.